All right, welcome everyone to today's Google Search Central SEO Office Hours Hangout. My name is John Mueller. I'm a search advocate on the search relations team here at Google in Switzerland. And part of what we do are these office hours where people can jump in and ask their question around their website and web search. We have a bunch of questions submitted on YouTube. I don't see any hands raised so far, but if any of you want to get started with the first question, you're welcome to jump in. All right, Hazel, go for it.
Hi, John. I guess I'll be the first one. Uh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I've got one question about page title and description. So a few days ago, we optimized our page title and description. And after that changing, we see the title and description changed when using the site to search in the Google. But after a longer while, the title and description has been back to the one at the first place. So in this case, does Google think the former title and description are better than the one we optimized? That's why it changes. Any other possible reason that may cause this?
I wouldn't necessarily assume that if Google changes it to something that Google thinks it's better and that you should use that title too. It's more that kind of our systems have kind of selected a different title. And usually the title is picked on a per page basis. So that would feel a little bit weird if we show one title first and then shift it to a different title later on. So it might also just be that we kind of have shifted to an older version of the page for indexing and processing in general, and then we'll shift back to the new version as soon as we can kind of process that properly again. So from that point of view, I wouldn't necessarily see it as a sign that kind of what you did was not perceived as being good by Google, but it's just being shown like that. And one of the things you can do, specifically with titles, because they're based on the page itself now and not on the query, is you can submit that page for reindexing and reprocessing. And then pretty much as soon as that is reprocessed, you can look at the title with a site query to see what is the current title. And you can use that process to kind of fine-tune the titles that you give on your pages and see how does Google actually show the title. Does it change the words? Does the separator make a difference? Do kind of like parentheses or brackets make a difference? And essentially kind of optimize the title for what you would like to have shown for that specific page. And since you're working on a larger site, probably you have templates that are across lots of different pages. Sometimes you can update those templates as well to use kind of the same things that you learned from optimizing a single page title.
Yeah. Yes, we do like have the templates, like you said, for our different specific page type. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in a situation like this, what I would do is try to see, is Google maybe accidentally switching back to an older version of a page in general? And will it switch back to the new version, kind of to separate out the aspect of the page title changing and then going back? And then really try on a per page basis to figure out what is the best way for you to show titles so that they can be picked up and shown in search.
Okay, good. We'll try the method you said. Thank you.
Cool. All right. All right, Rado.
Hey, John.
Hi.
I have a question. Imagine a franchise with 100 franchisees. Every franchisee has a microsite after the domain, like domain/branch1 and the corresponding URLs. Now, what would be the best practice to have a content displayed? Well, it's really hard to have 100 branches, have 100 different contents. pretty much it will be saying the same, as they are part of the same franchise. They're offering the same two services. They're following the same rules and procedures. And is that a problem from perspective of Google? Like from a user perspective, it doesn't matter, as a user is looking to solve a problem in a location, in a given location. And so for the user, it doesn't matter if that same content or nearly the same content is visible on 100 other pages. Now, what does Google think about it?
Now, I think there are two aspects I would look at here. On the one hand, I would watch out for creating doorway sites, doorway pages. And that's something that we have mentioned in the webmaster guidelines. Usually, doorway pages are more about kind of like swapping out one word on a page, essentially, where the rest of the content is the same. So if you have a specific service that you create pages for every city nearby, or every street, or every region nearby, and you create hundreds of these pages that are essentially just driving traffic to the same business. That's one thing I would watch out for. I think with franchises, probably that's less of an issue because these are essentially separate businesses. It's not the same business that has like hundreds of different location pages. It's really essentially separate businesses, at least from what I understand from your case.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And the other thing is, I think more of a strategic question, which is around how you want your content to be findable in search and what you consider to be important with regards to your content. In particular, if you take kind of the critical content and you duplicate it across these hundreds of pages, then you're kind of diluting the value of that content across these hundreds of pages. And you kind of have to balance the aspect of people trying to find individual locations with your kind of competitiveness of your primary content. So for example, if you have, I don't know, information on how to do some specific service on your car or something like that, then that's something where maybe there's a lot of competition in the search results, and you want to have a really strong page. And if you want to have a really strong page, then usually you don't want to kind of dilute that page across all of these hundreds of other kind of separate location pages.
Yeah.
So that's something where I think from a strategic point of view, some content you'll want to kind of like keep in one place, and other content will make sense to separate out on these individual pages.
It's not like being 100% duplicate, probably like 70-80%, because there will be some uniqueness due to the different specifics of every branch, of the success rate in closing deals, etc., because they're in the real estate. So yeah, but in its essentials, it will be pretty much the same. They are doing sales, they are doing lettings, and so you can't hover much around, especially if you have that many locations.
Yeah, but I still think like you need to figure out which of these kinds of content are very competitive, where it makes sense for you to have one central version that is kind of like highly competitive, and which of these pages are essentially trying to target a very specific kind of question from a user, where they say, oh, I would like to rent a home in this city, for example. Then going to that location page is fine. Whereas if it's a question of like, I don't know, how do I calculate the rental fees, then that might be something where you have one kind of central page across all of these different
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Well, yeah. Thank you.
All right. Let's see, Phoebe.
Hi, good morning. It's Phoebe.
Phoebe. Oh, OK.
No problem. So my question, it's already posted on the Google channel, but I'll just repeat it now. So I work in a content creation agency, and we work with different blogs. And the agency's been running for more than 10 years, and we've never had problems with getting our articles indexed. But it's for the last like 6 months, all of the new blogs especially are having big problems getting their articles indexed. So obviously we're working on like organic traffic, and if we're not getting our articles indexed, then we can't work on that or optimize any content. And I was just wondering if there's any specific reason, maybe there's been some sort of change, or if we just have to wait and see what happens. Because we have done a lot of like technical revisions of the sitemaps and everything. And in theory, everything should be running correctly, but we've just like noticed this this decrease in articles getting indexed.
Yeah, it's hard to say in general without being able to kind of look at some of these example sites. If you have some examples of pages that you've created that are not like super fresh, but I don't know, a couple of weeks old that are still not getting indexed, I would love to get some of those examples. If you can drop them here in the chat, that would be useful.
Okay.
In general, though, I think what I see with a lot of these kind of questions that tend to come up around my content not being indexed is that from a technical point of view, a lot of these sites are really good, that they're doing the right things with regards to sitemaps, kind of the internal linking is set up really well. But it's more that on our side, from a quality point of view, it's something where it feels like the bar is kind of like slowly going up, in that more and more people are creating content that is technically OK, but it's not from a quality point of view such that we'd say, well, this is really critical content to include in the search results. And usually, that's something that's not tied to that specific article. Like if you create an article on a topic, then it's not that that article will be seen as kind of lower quality. It's more that the site overall has been seen as, well, it's kind of OK. It's technically OK. It's not spam, but it's also not fantastic content. So our systems would tend to kind of slow down with regards to crawling and indexing of that content, because we're not sure how we would actually show this content in the search results. And that's something that I've seen, I think, more and more. And it's usually less a matter of a technical issue on a website, especially if other content is being indexed, because if some content works and other content doesn't work on a website, then from a technical point of view, probably they're all set up in the same way. But it's really more the overall quality of the websites themselves. And,
Okay.
and again, I don't know your site, so it's
Well, in theory,
kind
they
of
should
hard.
be pretty good quality, because we do work with like expert writers in their fields. So that you're mentioning the quality could be the problem is sort of worrying me. Would you have any suggestions for us to sort of improve this? Because it is like no articles have been indexed in the last 5 months. So it's not like some are and some aren't. It's like a major problem in that regard.
Yeah. And are you seeing that we're crawling the website itself?
No, but we have requested the indexing individually for each of the articles.
Mm-hmm.
And that still hasn't given results. So they are being crawled, and the pages are qualified as discovered and currently not indexed. So they have been crawled by Google. They're just not getting indexed.
OK. If they're discovered and not indexed, usually that means we've seen a link to them, but we haven't actually crawled them. The next step would be kind of crawled and not indexed, and then we would index it. But that kind of means we know about these pages, and when our systems think that it makes sense to include more content from those sites, then we can go off and actually crawl those pages and index them as well. I mean, it's always tricky for me to say, like, there's a quality issue with your website without having actually seen it at all, which is why I find these examples really useful, and I bring them pretty much all to the indexing team themselves, so that they can take a look as well to kind of see, is this really something where our systems are doing the right thing, or are they confused for whatever reason?
Okay, so maybe I could come back next week with a list of examples, because it is an agency-wide problem. So this is happening in more than just like one blog. So maybe if you need some examples, I'll leave them next week so that I can get together a full list.
Sure. I mean, I don't need a full list. Like, just just some samples of
Okay.
some of the pages that you've seen where you think, well, this is a reasonable site. Why isn't Google picking up more content? I think from a practical point of view, it's not that we've stopped crawling the web or that we don't want to index more content. It's really more that like we see a lot of technically valid content, and our systems are still limited in the sense that we can't index the whole web. So we kind of have to figure out how to evaluate the quality and figure out which of these pages make sense to be indexed so that we can actually show them in the search results afterwards.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for all of the information. And I'll come back next week with some examples so we can
Cool.
go into it further. Thank
Cool.
you.
All right. Thanks. All right, Joseph.
Hello, John.
Hi.
If you give permission, I'd like to ask two questions.
Sure.
First off, we have a news publishing website since 2009. We post articles related to recipes, health, fitness, and stuff like that. So we have articles that are considered per an SEO tool as duplicate content. But what we tend to do is recreate another version of this recipe, let's say, or maybe tweak around maybe sugar-free or salt-free or everything related to that. So it's still considered as duplicate content. What this SEO tool suggested is that we remove it because none of the duplicate content are being ranked or indexed by Google. So what is the solution for this?
Yeah. So I think first of all, I would be cautious about blindly following any SEO tool, just kind of as something to start with. In that SEO tools tend to make assumptions with regards to what Google will do and what will happen, and sometimes those assumptions are okay, and sometimes they're not correct. And I think taking this kind of feedback from SEO tools is useful because it's still something where you can take a look at it and you have to make a judgment call. And you might choose to say, well, I'm ignoring the tool in this case, and I'm kind of following the guidance in a different case. So just kind of like to start with, like if you're seeing something even from a very popular SEO tool that tells you, oh, you should disavow these links or you should delete this content, like always use your judgment first before blindly following that. With regards to duplicate content like that, or I guess in this case, it wouldn't be duplicate per se because it's slightly different content. It's something where you always kind of need to consider the strategic aspect of how you want your pages to be shown and what the competitive environment is like in the search results. And sometimes it makes sense to have kind of one article kind of split up into different variations because these individual variations are unique enough that people are actually searching for them. And sometimes it makes sense to combine an article and say, well, I have 3 or 4 variations. I will make one page out of it. And usually what happens there is that one page is a little bit stronger than in the search results. So that means if it's a very competitive environment, having fewer pages that are stronger is usually a good idea. Whereas if you're already doing really well in those kind of queries, and maybe sometimes having multiple variations is an option to kind of better target the specific intents that people have. And that's not something where I would say like there's always one clear answer. You should have fewer pages or you should have more pages. It's really something where if you see this kind of situation popping up, you can make a judgment call. And it's more almost like a strategic decision rather than an SEO decision.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think in a case like this, I would check to see like what are the queries leading up to these pages? Are you even getting enough visibility for these pages individually? And if you're seeing that they're ranking very badly at the moment, then maybe it makes sense to combine them. Maybe it's also the case that the competitive environment for those queries that you're targeting is so strong that even if you combine it, it doesn't make a difference. So it's kind of like, yeah, you have to
Yes.
look at all of those sites.
Another question is about the broken links on our website. Where our website has around 40K in pages and double the links. So we have around 20K of broken links caused by a migration gone bad from a platform to another platform. Since then, we started noticing decrease in organic traffic. We used to rank, let's say, for 20K, 25K per day in organic traffic. Now we're only getting like 2 to 3K or 4K at max. So do you think it's a great metric to SEO ranking to remove these broken links and 404 pages?
When did you do that migration? Is that longer ago?
Yes, it happened in 2020,
2020.
about 2 years ago.
Yeah. My guess is, for the most part, that doesn't matter anymore. So it is something I would watch out for with any migration, because essentially the main thing you want to catch is the situation where someone externally links to your website, and that link to your website essentially goes into nowhere. So if you see someone externally linking to a page that is now a 404 page because you forgot to redirect it, that link is kind of lost.
Yes.
And if you see that happening at a larger scale, then those links are things that you will lose, and that can be reflected in the search results over time as well. I'd say for a certain while, you can still go back and add a redirect for those individual links that you see like that. I don't know if after 2 years it would make a big difference, unless there are really strong links that are going to your site and kind of being lost like that. So that's kind of what I would look at there is if you have a chance to kind of look at a links report from back then and can double check the more important links that you find there and see if they still work, if they redirect to a real page on your website, that's something where I would perhaps even after 2 years go in and see if there's something that you can do there. You can also estimate this kind of in a rough way by looking at your server logs if you have access. In that if you see a lot of crawlers from search engines go to 404 pages, sometimes that's a sign that they think there's going to be something useful there, and then they get lost. So that might be a way to look at it and see, like, I don't know, from the last month, the 404 pages that were accessed by search engines, which of these should be redirected to something useful.
That's an excellent tip. Thank you, John.
Sure. Cool. Let's see, Sufayan.
Yeah. Hi, John. Currently,
Hi.
I'm working on a website that is based in India, and we get leads from all over India. As we can provide our services all over the world, but firstly, being in India, I want to rank my service pages in USA to get more leads from there. So, can you help me know what all things I can do so that I can rank on top of my competitors that are even in USA? I have already done free off page, changed the UI UX and content structure according to the US region. So, what more I can do to start ranking on the US service pages that I have created?
Yeah, it's hard to say without knowing your website.
It's
There,
actually a SEO agency that we all provide only SEO services. So, we need to start getting leads from the US region based
yeah,
in India.
yeah. So usually the thing that that I think you need to watch out for is, on the one hand, geo-targeting. In that if you're going from a country-specific website to something that is more global, then it helps to make sure that from a technical point of view, your website is available for that. So in particular, something like using a generic top-level domain instead of a country-specific top-level domain, that can help. The other thing to also keep in mind is that anytime when you go from a country-level website to a global level website, is that the competition just changes completely. And it might be the case that, for example, in India, you're ranking really well for these queries. But in the US, the competition is just so much stronger that even kind of that really well level from India doesn't translate to something that is reasonable in the US. And that's kind of, I think, like you've probably seen from SEO, is not something that you can just fix with technical issues. You really have to kind of work on that for the long run to make sure that your website is actually much, much stronger, and that people kind of see it also as something, I don't know, relevant for them in their country. And I don't think there's like one technical trick that you can do to make that happen.
Okay, so John, one last question. As technically, I need a 50% sessions from US. So what I can do, as I have some blog pages also, which gets 50 to 60% traffic from India. So now I want some 50% traffic from US for the US blogs. So how can I do that?
I don't think you can just turn that on and turn that off. I mean, at most, like if you're looking at percentages, you can block people from India, but I don't think that's kind of what you'd want to do. Essentially, you need to kind of grow your website and your visibility in the US or globally, at least, so that it becomes more relevant. And that's usually not something where you can just, I don't know, put the words on the page a couple of times, and then suddenly you're much more competitive. Because especially in the SEO space, there are lots of people doing SEO, and it's very competitive. And you can't just jump in and say, well, I will be ranking
Yes.
in a global market or in a really strong US market immediately. No.
Yeah, got it. Thank you so much, John.
Sure. OK, let me go through some of the submitted questions. And if any of you have questions along the way, feel free to jump in or raise your hand so that I can switch back to you afterwards. Let's see. We're working with an e-commerce client. Their e-commerce is on open source, which is an online store management system. On the other hand, their blog is on WordPress. The main URL is example.com, whereas the blog is blog.example.com. What would be the best approach for this client to get credit from the blogs? So they already get credit from the blogs in the sense that probably these sites are cross-linked between each other. And that's kind of what we're looking for, to make sure that kind of the two aspects are linked between each other so that we can pass signals from one side to the other. From our point of view, we don't kind of say that subdomains or subdirectories are kind of preferred in any particular way. Some SEOs have very strong opinions about subdomains and subdirectories and would probably want to put this all on the same domain. But from our point of view, you could do it like this as well. So that's I guess from our point of view, like this setup would be fine. If you did want to move it into the same domain, then practically speaking, that usually means you have to do some technical kind of tricks, where essentially you proxy one subdomain as a subdirectory somewhere else, and you have to make sure that all of the links work and all of that. Sometimes that's quite complicated. So that's kind of one thing to watch out for. The other thing I'd say is that sometimes e-commerce systems also have some limited kind of page creation ability as well. I don't know in this specific case if that's true. But sometimes being able to create individual pages within the e-commerce site is something that you can do. And sometimes that's enough for the kind of basic level blogging that people do on an e-commerce site. It's definitely not the case that we would say WordPress blogs are the best, and they will always rank #1 when it comes to blogs. So if you can create the same content within a more limited e-commerce kind of text page creation system, then probably that's just as good. So that's, I think, another option that might work out for you. In Search Console, when looking at the pages report, I click on one page that has 241 clicks. I click on the queries report, and the queries add up to 148. Do we attribute this to the anonymized queries mentioned in the Help Center? Yes, usually that's the case. So in particular, when you look at the page level, we can show you all of the information in Search Console. And that is because there's nothing kind of unique about the individual page requests. But when it comes to queries, there are queries that have only very limited use. And we would not show those necessarily in Search Console. That means when you look at the report, you'll see on the one hand the number on top of the report where it says like total impressions or total clicks. And you can look at the individual impressions and clicks for each individual query. And sometimes when you add up the table, it doesn't match up. And that's essentially due to us dropping those queries that are kind of anonymized queries. And that's kind of the differences that you would see there. So in Search Console, if you look at it on a page level, you'll see slightly different numbers than on a per query level. And on a query level, when you look at the table itself, you might see slightly different numbers than the summary on top. And from our point of view, if you want to look at the individual queries, then the query level data is definitely useful. But if you want to see the full picture of the impressions to the site, then you kind of want to look at the page level or the site level results and use that for tracking the trends and kind of changes over time. Among other activities, my client sells bakery products on an e-commerce site. Many of these have a seasonal flair. For example, St. Patrick's Day. When their product is in season, they would like to see it indexed and, if possible, ranked prominently. When we went to test and submit the product URL for indexing, they don't have a field aggregate ranking or review, both of which are considered optional by schema fields. Because of this, they get a yellow warning. In other words, the page can be crawled, but not submitted, indexed, or ranked. It seems like an optional schema field should allow the page to be indexed. Would you agree? And then it has an example there. So the page can definitely be indexed, even if some of the structured data markup is wrong. The page can be indexed even if the HTML itself is completely broken. So just purely because the structured data is not complete or not optimal would not block indexing. So that's kind of the first step here. The other part, I think, is something that is useful to look at specifically for e-commerce sites, in that it's very helpful for us to understand what you would consider to be important across a website. That means when we look at a website, if you show us as visibly as possible like what you think is critical here, then it's easier for us to pick that up. From a practical point of view, that means when we look at something like the homepage of a website or whatever the most important page is from the website, like, let us know about what you consider to be important and link to that prominently. So for something like a St. Patrick's Day cake, that's something where when we look at the homepage, we should be able to see that this is actually a seasonal thing, and this is really important for you. And that we find direct links from the homepage to that specific product. When I looked at this specific example here, I found, the page is linked here with that specific St. Patrick's Day cake. But when you look at the homepage of the site, it's not mentioned anywhere. And even kind of like the next level in from that website, you don't see that this cake is visibly linked somewhere. That means for us, when we look at this website overall, even if we see this specific product being mentioned in a sitemap file, it looks like some random product that just happened to show up in the e-commerce site. We don't realize that actually this is something that is really important to you and that you would like to have treated kind of prominently in the search results. So what I would do in cases like this, where you have especially some time-limited event happening, is make sure that you're really visibly linking to that from the homepage, that you include some of the aspects in the homepage as well, so that even if we only re-index and reprocess your homepage, we already know that there's some information there that we can pick up on. So if you have a St. Patrick's Day cake, for example, and you mention it on your homepage, and we only update your homepage for whatever reason, then if someone searches for St. Patrick's Day cake, then we will at least know your homepage could be relevant for that query. And ideally, if it's linked directly from the homepage, then we can pick up that product as well and see, well, this is a really important product for this website. And probably we can process it a little bit faster than we could some random other product that you happen to update on a website. So essentially, with internal linking, you can give us a lot of information about what you care about across a website. And for large part, our algorithms will try to follow that. It's not that they'll make a judgment call on their own. It's more that they look at your site and they realize, oh, this person says this is really important. So we'll kind of give it a little bit more weight. And what you consider important is totally up to you. It might be something seasonal. It might be something that you sell really well. It might be something where you make the most money out of, or something where the competitive environment is particularly strong and you want to get a foothold in there. All of that is totally up to you. But make it as clear as possible. When we look at your website, especially your homepage, especially the more important pages on a site, what you want kind of to be treated in the foreground when it comes to search. I have images with some text on it. In that case, should I use alt text? I think ideally, if you have text and images, it probably makes sense to have the text directly on the page itself. Nowadays, there are lots of ways to kind of creatively display text across a website. So I wouldn't necessarily try to kind of like use text and images and then use the alt text as a way to kind of help with that. I think the alt text is a great way to help with that. But ideally, it's better to avoid having text and images. And the question goes on, should I write alt text for products for an e-commerce site, since there's already text beneath the product that describes the product? So from a more general point of view, the alt text is meant as a kind of a replacement or description of the image. And that's something that is particularly useful for people who can't look at individual images, who use things like screen readers. But it also helps search engines to understand what this image is about. And if you already have kind of like the same description for a product around the image, then for search engines, we kind of have what we need. But for people with screen readers, maybe it still makes sense to have some kind of alt text for that specific image. And in a case like this, I would avoid the situation where you're just repeating the same thing over and over. So avoid having like a title of a product be used as an alt text for the image, but rather kind of like describe the image in a slightly different way. So that's kind of the recommendation I would have there. I wouldn't just blindly copy and paste the same text that you already have on a page as an alt text for an image, because that doesn't really help search engines, and it doesn't really help people who rely on screen readers. When adding content to a site, could we expect to see results pretty quickly, or would we need to wait for an update to see the full effects? So there's no artificial timing on our side with regards to making changes on a website. So it's not that we artificially hold things back for a specific period of time or a specific update. It's really when we can recrawl and reprocess the page, we'll try to reflect that in the search results as quickly as possible. So if you change a text on a page, then usually as soon as we can recrawl that text can be findable in search. And if you search for that specifically, it should come up. And that can be after several seconds after making that change, if we can pick it up really quickly. Sometimes we crawl pages a little bit slower, in that maybe it takes a few weeks or a few months for us to recrawl that individual page. And that's kind of the timeline that you would have in a case like that. And this kind of crawl rate depends on the website and on the specific pages themselves. So it can happen that the home page we crawl very quickly, and maybe one of the articles or the product pages is crawled a bit slower. Yeah, let me see. Mark has a question. Would you use alt tags for images that use only decoration within a longer text? Or how would you treat those mostly stock images? I think it's totally up to you. So I can't speak for the accessibility point of view. So that's kind of like the one angle that is there. But from an SEO point of view, the alt text really helps us to understand the image better for image search. And if you don't care about this image for image search, then like that's fine. Like do whatever you want with it. And that's something for decorative images. Sometimes you just don't care for things like stock photos where you know that the same image is on lots of other sites. You don't care about image search for that. Like do whatever you want to do there. And I would focus more on the accessibility aspect there rather than the pure SEO aspect. It's not the case that we would say a web, like a textual web page has more value because it has images. It's really just, well, we see the alt text and we apply that to the image. And if someone searches for the image, we can use that to better understand the image. It's not that the web page in kind of the text web search would rank better because it has an image. Cool. Let's see. Our CMS automatically updates the last modified date for every change, even when adding a few words, fixing a spelling mistake, or adding an internal link. Is this a good SEO practice, or should the last modified date only be updated when there are substantial changes to the content? I think people do it in different ways. I don't think from an SEO point of view it matters much. So when we look at things like sitemap files, where there's also a last modified date, the sitemap team ideally wants to see that date updated whenever there are any changes on the page, when it makes sense for us to recrawl that page. And that includes things like a random link in the sidebar, for example. So from that point of view, like people do it in different ways, and it should just work out. With regards to kind of the last modified date in the structured data itself, usually I think it makes sense to have something aligned with when the primary content actually changes. But if there are for technical reasons why you have to do that immediately, or why your CMS does it immediately, I don't see a problem with that. When it comes to dates on the page that we sometimes show in a snippet, what happens there is we try to find multiple mentions of that date on the page, kind of as a confirmation. And then we use that as something where we say, well, this date is probably associated with this page. And it's fairly certain that it's a reasonable date. And if we were to show a date in the snippet, we would probably choose that one. We don't show a date in the snippet for all pages. And it's really something where you can help to guide that as well by making sure that maybe there's a visible date on the page as well. So if you have a news article, for example, and there's a visible date on the page, and the sitemap file has a slightly different date, then probably we will give that visible date a little bit more weight. So that might be another way that you can control that a little bit. Let's see. Maybe we'll switch to some more live questions from you all. Don't have a ton of people raising hands, but that's fine. Let's see. Akash, go for it.
Hi, sir. Hi.
Hi.
So my question is related to the way the links are added. So one of my technical member, has added the links in the form of like underscore self or underscore target or underscore equal to blank. Okay, I can add few examples over here in the chat box.
OK.
how Google bots are able to crawl these things? Do they understand that there are links added to this particular that tag something over here that mention? Because these kind of structure are being present for most of my a particular client's website. And I don't know, because when we use a different types of crawlers, like suppose streaming fog or some other crawler, those those crawlers are able to detect the links, but I have no idea how Google bots and all other able to treat these things.
And like in the example, you have href equals and then just empty quotes. Is there usually a link there, or?
No, so what they mean is underscore self, like target is equals to underscore self, will itself be a link, and if you click on that, you will definitely get to the particular link, which actually works. Like if a user comes to my page and he wants it to go up a particular page, these structures might help them. But I didn't find a particular link in the href is equal to something. So I don't know how these structures are working, but they are working. So, and the other crawler, like as I mentioned, the screaming fog, they are able to detect this kind of structure. These are the correct links which are added over here, but there is no link over here. So I don't I really wanted to know the overall pattern of the bot. Will they also be able to detect, just because the streaming fog is again, I think, designed the way the bot crawl and render the pages?
Yeah. So the target attribute there, I think we just ignore because it makes more sense from a browser point of view what happens. Usually the target attribute, as far as I recall, refers to how that link should be opened. So if you have a frame on a page, then it will open that link in a frame, for example, or in a new tab, those kind of things. And from our point of view, we don't care. So we ignore the target attribute. So that target equals and then underscore self. It's basically we ignore that. The href attribute in the link is essentially what we focus on. If there's no href kind of value given there, then essentially that link goes to the same page, and we ignore that. So it's from our point of view, like if we were to see something like you posted in a chat where it's like a target equals self and then href equals nothing, we would think that this is something that we can drop because there's no kind of source and destination for that individual link, because it just points to itself again.
Okay.
If you had a URL after the href equals, then we would treat that as a normal link to that page.
Two more questions, sir.
Sure.
One is related to the breadcrumbs. There's a usual pattern that I have seen on most of the websites. Like if there's a page at level 3, so let's say a specific blog pages. So our structures are usually at the home page we link something at the blog page and then the blog specific pages. However, for an e-commerce page, is like say a product page wherein a user can reach to that particular page through multiple ways, right? Through filters, through brand pages, through city level pages, or directly to the pages. So I've seen an example of multiple breadcrumbs within that particular page. Like these are the different ways that you can reach to this particular product pages. Uh, but when I see the pattern in the sub, when so like if you search for a particular product and just above your title, your breadcrumb has been listed. So that structure is something which I have not mentioned in my breadcrumb schema. Neither that particular thing is been added on an as a on page breadcrumb on my pages. So how these things correlate to each other?
Yeah, I suspect what is happening there is that you have multiple breadcrumb schemas on the same page, and we don't know what to do with them, so we ignore them completely, and we try to figure it out ourselves. So from that point of view, if you're kind of giving us conflicting markup, then it can happen that we don't use any of that, and we treat it as if there's no breadcrumb markup at all on this page. So I could imagine that's what's happening there. And when we don't have any breadcrumb markup at all, sometimes we will try to figure out what the path is leading to that page. Sometimes we will rely on the URL structure, like the folders that you have there, and we will show that. So usually what I would recommend in a case like this is for you to make sure that you have just one set of that markup on the pages, and so that we can pick that markup up and say, oh, well, here's reasonable markup. We will just use it. If you have visible breadcrumbs on the page that show kind of different paths, that's fine, as long as the structured data is really for one specific version.
Okay. Okay. Got it. And one last one.
Sure.
Recently, for one of my clients, I see there were a couple of pages who were ranking for some specific queries. But I think it's been 2 weeks. I see for any of the queries, my homepage is getting ranked. So kind of a minor update from the search side, and it happens all the time that I know. But how is that possible? Like for each and all, but like for every query, there is only the my homepage is getting ranked, and all of other pages are like suddenly disappear from the search. How's Google treating it?
So that the home page is ranking instead of the more specific page, or
Yes,
how do you mean?
yes. I don't know, but the pattern is such that earlier we used to rank for some specific queries, specific pages, like we have that dedicated page structure. But
Yeah.
could be a bug, I guess. But this is the usual pattern that I'm like for all my queries. Let's say only the home page is seen on the search for the specific position as well. It could be like for position 3, for position 10, 15, or maybe somewhere else. But
Yeah.
directly the home page is getting set.
It's hard to say. Usually that means that we think the home page is a better match for that specific query, and it could be that some of the information is on the home page itself. It could be that the more detailed page is seen as not such a good page from our point of view. Usually it's one of those versions, and it's something where you can experiment with kind of like removing some of that information from the home page, but you kind of have to also think about what you can do to improve the detail page in that regard. Because what you kind of want to avoid happening is that you remove the home page from the search results, and then nothing ranks from your website for that query anymore.
Right.
Yeah, it's sometimes tricky to find that balance.
So because this is happening like from last 2 weeks, I've seen the internal structure, the breadcrumbs, everything looks good to me. Trying to add some more other relevant information, but can we tell with the help of like breadcrumbs or internal links which are the anchor text or the things that we are trying to match for the particular target page and rank in the SERP? Like, is this still the best way, or we are still lagging from few pointers that we definitely need to focus upon?
I think that always helps. So internal linking is one of those ways that you can give us more information about kind of the relative context of your individual pages. And for internal linking, we take into account things like the anchor text, which gives us a lot of information about what you think is relevant on the other page. So sometimes with internal linking, you can help there. But especially when we're talking about the home page versus a detail page, if you link from the home page with an anchor text to a detail page, then you also include that text on the home page because it's kind of a part of the anchor text. So it's kind of like sometimes a bit tricky to find that balance.
Okay, we'll work upon that pointer. I have got the hint, but thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Sure, sure. Cool. OK, let's see. Laszlo.
Let me first unmute. Good morning, John from Zurich. Good morning, everyone.
Oh, hi.
I have 2 questions. I also raised one of the questions earlier ahead of the event. So we have typical on home pages a hero image, and the hero image is embedded not with the image tag, but rather as a background image. With that, we're lacking the possibility to add an alt attribute to describe the image. There are maybe some technical aspects why the agency has done that approach for us, but I was wondering what is the recommendation if we want to have the image indexed, so be available on the image search on Google, but also to understand how is Google judging, if the image is embedded as a background image, the relevance for the page, and also the text that we can't put behind the image.
Yeah. So I think for the most part, if you're using something like a CSS background attribute to display an image, then we would not pick that up for image search. It might be that that has changed in the meantime, but at least in the past, it was such that we only focused on the image tag, kind of the source attribute for the image tag. And if you had a picture element, then that's still kind of within the same thing. And the other option was if you link to an image file directly, then we would also be able to pick that up for image search. But if it's purely a CSS background image, then we, at least in the past, did not pick that up. And it sounds like that's still the case. So it's tricky for me to say like how you can best embed that. One thing you could potentially do is make sure that it's at least linked on the page itself, if you care about it for image search. It is also something where sometimes it's not critical for that image to be findable in image search. So if you have something like a decorative image of your, I don't know, your company's headquarters or something, then in image search, it's going to be rare that someone actually searches for that. So that's something where you also have to almost make a judgment call of, well, technically, if like we want traffic from image search, this is the way to do it. But in practice, that particular traffic from image search is not critical for our website, so we don't necessarily care about that.
And okay, I understood that one, and about not be able to describe. The alt attribute and the title attribute could potentially be used to describe the image. Would the title be enough? We're probably using a div tag, and then with CSS we style it. Would the title be enough to describe the image so that Google understands, okay, this is the image that we have, or we have something here, and the title would give more context. Okay, what's here? Okay, good.
Yeah. So for image search, we use a number of different things. The alt attribute is kind of the most straightforward one. But we also look at the text around the image itself. We look at things like the title tag, if you have a link to an image file. So things like the headings on the page, the captions below the image, even that will be taken into account for image search. So title attribute is usually the easiest way to kind of give that information, but it's not the only thing that we use.
Good. So then my second question is, let me a little bit more broadly explain what our challenge is. We are a B2B2C company, and we have showrooms. But the showrooms are not under our brand, but rather they are our B2B partners. Now, how can we make those locations be more accessible on Google Maps? So if someone searches on Google for either a product or even for a company name, a partner company name, that we can kind of push the information that we have on our own website, kind of a dealer locator or showroom locator, to make all those hundreds of locations better accessible on Google Maps.
I don't know. So the most, I think the closest help I can give you there is that if you have individual pages for the individual locations, then we can kind of associate that and recognize the address on those pages and the opening hours and things like that. We don't need to know which products are in which locations, but at least you'd have one landing page per location. And then the part with regards to Google Maps is more about the Google Business profiles, I think they're called, the Google My Business entries. And I don't really have much insight into that side. I believe there's a way to kind of bulk upload locations as well, but I don't have any insight there. That's something where I believe there's a help forum for Google local businesses, or I don't know what they're called nowadays. So the business profile pages where you can go and kind of ask specifically about that. And those would then be visible in Google Maps. And they would be visible then in the map that we sometimes show in the search results when someone is looking for a business name or a kind of a product.
Okay, maybe a follow-up question to that. I mean, that was years ago, and maybe that has changed. On Google Earth, you had once this I think it was KLM, kind of an XML format. Would that also be an alternative to provide all the details, of location via a certain interface that?
I don't think we use that anymore. So we used to have geo sitemap files, which were connected to, I think, the KLM files. But I don't think that's used at all anymore.
OK, good. Thanks a lot, John.
Sure. Cool. All right. Let me pause the recording here. Thank you all for sticking around. I see there's still some more hands up, so I still have some more time afterwards to go through those. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you'd like to submit questions, we set up the community, or set up an entry in the community page, usually a couple days before the event takes place. And if you'd like to join these live, then I post the link there as well. So again, thank you for submitting all of the questions, and hope to see you all in one of the future episodes.